Hey YouTube, hey viewers, and welcome back to another episode of creating our social media API using Laravel. Today's session is going to be quite interesting. We're kind of moving along the phases now, so we've managed to register a user. I've kind of showed you the repository pattern that we'll be doing to build the application. Don't worry, I'll keep enforcing that every session because we're going to be going through that pattern every time we do something that needs a bit of business logic and etc. So if you were a bit confused in the last session, don't worry. Obviously, every session that we have now will kind of follow that repository pattern. So it'll kind of get drilled into your head. Today's session is going to be interesting. We're actually going to do some login logic today. So we're going to get our login working. This is going to be probably part one. I'm going to split this into two different parts. So we'll just keep this as part one. And then I'm going to show you how to group the routes correctly. So when you use these logins and things, you'll be able to put some middleware in the middle and we can control what's actually happening for the end user. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's go into our PHP store. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can set up a route for our users to obviously log in. So you remember we have this route post and it's called register with the auth controller, and then it's called register. We're going to do the same again, so we can duplicate that line. PHP Storm is Control D, so if you're using my IDE. So it's still going to be post, and in this case it's going to be called login is what we want to use. And we want it to point towards the login function. So remember, this goes to our controller. Remember, this is like our airport conductor dude. He tells the plane where to go. We go to this controller and we're going to land on this runway called login. So we need to write some logic for our login within inside this auth controller. So if we pop into our auth controller, you can see we've already got our register going on here. We're going to be making some logic for our login. So let's quickly throw out a function. So public function login. This is going to, because it's a post request, we're going to make sure that we accept request. And it's going to be of request. Curly braces. Again, for homework, I'm going to set out for you to change this so it'll be like one of these. So we can control it within inside our requests. Remember, we can separate them. We don't have to follow this logic, but again, that's up to you. You can keep it this way. It really doesn't matter. And what we're going to be doing with this logic is we're going to be pushing it towards our repository pattern. So like we did something very similar to this. We said this user service is our register user, and we then sent all the data across. So we're going to do the same thing. So this time we're going to call it new user because we are creating a new user. And it's equal to this user service. Remember that we built it in the last session. And we notice it only brings up register user, but for now we're just going to make one. So we're going to call this login user. And it's just going to say, well, it doesn't exist, but we are going to make that. And we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to send the request all. Pop that in like that. So basically it's saying we're going to push all our requests into this service to do our login of our user. That's pretty cool. We can quite easily just copy this function for now, and we're going to jump into our user service. And as you can see, we have our register user data here. We're going to do the same again. So we're going to just public function login. You kind of feel like this is a bit repetitive, but it's good to do it repetitively this way. And obviously we're going to have array of data. I'm not going to split it up this way, just because I'm going to show you something a little bit different. Remember, I made this data and then we kind of put this into a new array of data and then we passed it into our repository. We're not going to do it this way. We're just going to pass everything across so I can show you something a little bit different. So inside this login user, we don't really need to do much with inside the database here. So technically we don't need to put this into our repository because we're not doing anything within the database. Laravel is pretty cool and we can handle authentication without jumping into our eloquent models or anything like that. It has its own little auth functionality. And you can kind of see that if you go into config here and look at auth, you'll see that for our API, we're using this thing called Passport, and because we're using Passport, it's looking at this thing called users. So if we go down and have a look down here, we can see under the provider, so this is called provider users. In providers users, we can see it's using Eloquent, so it already knows that we're going to be using Eloquent model. But this time it's actually going to be looking at our user model. So if you had to make something different, for example, admins, you'd make a new provider for admins, and then you can log admins in that way. But this is quite handy because now we don't really need to go into the Eloquent model. We can just use some of the Laravel functionality that's built in, i.e. Auth, because this is an Auth config. So we can handle all this inside our service, inside our user service. And to do this, we're just going to do a simple if statement. And we're just going to say if, let's say we get the username and password, we then return something back. If we don't, then we can just, if we do get them in, we log them in. If we don't, we just throw a 401 or an unauthorized or something. So let's try that out. So we're going to say if, and then this is where the cool thing comes from Laravel. It's called Auth, right? So we use this Auth, and we can use this Auth to do as known as an attempt. And basically this attempt is going to be looking for credentials. And again, this is built into Laravel, and what we'll be passing in is just an array of data. Very straightforward. And what it's looking for is your normal stuff that you need for logging in. So your email, which will be your request. So actually it's not request, it's going to be data. And that data is going to be email. Now, before we get into this, let's actually see if that works. Let's comment this out and let's actually die and dump and see what data does if we do data email. Because remember, it didn't work last time. We had to do this. And we probably have to do the same again, actually. But I just want to show you that we can set up the route. And then once the route's working, we can see it happening. So we got the route set up. We got the API. It's saying, okay, we're going to go log in, auth controller login. Our auth controller is set up. So we've got the login going into our user service, i.e. our login user. And now we're going to handle our logic here. So we need to set up in Postman. Dead straightforward. We can copy this if you already saved it. So if you duplicate it, because it's still a post request and we can keep the URLs, I'm going to show you a little technique that one of my work friends showed me, but you can actually set up environments and stuff inside Postman. And I'll show you how to do that as well, because it's quite handy. So we're going to post, but we're not going to go to register. We're actually going to go to the login section. And we're going to put some stuff into the body. So we don't need name, we need email, and we don't need password confirmation. We're just going to use this guy that we had previously that we logged in. So Bob9 and password 1. We hit send. We can see that it says we're trying to get a property of email of none object. And that's because it doesn't like the way how we're handling this email. It needs to be passed in the exact same way as this up here. So data email. So if we then run that, we'll be able to get our email out. If we preview, you can see we get the email. So let's go back to writing our logic here. So we're going to say, okay, so our auth attempt needs to be a data email because we're going to check against the email which is inside the users table. But then we also need to check against the password. Again, this is pretty handy because all we need to do is we don't have to decrypt this. We don't have to do anything. We can just pass it in. And we passed it in exactly the same way as we did here with data password. So that's simple. And now that we have that, we can then inside our if statement say, well, okay, I'm now authenticated. So happy days for this. Again, we're going to be doing some middleware, so don't worry too much about this. So we can actually just do a DD and say, we made it. So basically saying we've logged in. That's all it is. We're just saying we made it. If we didn't make it, we can DD and saying, okay, oopsie, we didn't log in. This is just some debugging so we can see if it's working or not. So let's try that. So let's log in with Bob9 and password 1. And we can see it says we made it because it made it through the auth attempt of email, which it looks through in the user table. And also the password, which it also decrypts whilst looking at the password. So there's no change. Password looks like password 1, but it will decrypt it. And therefore, we've now made it into the right place that we want to. The best way to do this now is we can return whatever we want. Pretty straightforward. But the nice thing as well is that we can set our user to be an authorized user. And to do that, we use exactly the same type of stuff. Because they logged in, we can use this thing called auth, same thing that we used here, and we're going to set the user. So because we've done this authentication attempt, we can now call auth user all the time, and that will bring me the same authenticated user that we have. In this case, we're just setting a variable. So we can then just return this $user back to our original place. So remember, we went from our controller to our service. So we return that back. If we didn't, then we can just say, okay, we can return I don't know, let's just send the string of you didn't. Okay. Get all those common blocks. So if we go back to our controller, and now we have this new user, if we die and dump new user, like so, and log in, see we get a nice data model of our user. So we can see that we've got all the information we need about this user. Obviously, we're not remembering the token, and we have no access token yet, but we'll set that all up in a second. And we can see it's being created at and updated at. So it's just pretty much all the logic for our user that we've just logged in. And we can verify that because his email is bob9. But let's say, for example, I made a boo-boo. So let's do password 2 in this case. Then now you can see that we get this thing saying you didn't log in. So we can handle it differently. So the problem is if I had to go like if open and say new user. So I'm saying if there is a new user, I could say hi user, that in quotes. Okay, but then let's say, for example, I didn't have a user. We want to do the same thing. Then now you'll notice that it will keep saying hi user because we've got this user is actually a string. So there are ways that we can get around this. And I mean, the way how you normally would do this is you'll return just the user, but then you'll return back here a response message. But again, I want to leave that for another session to come, hence why I'm splitting it into 2 parts. So for now, we're just going to be working with the correct login credentials for a user. So what we're going to do is if we're going to just presume that we have a user, so we're just going to be like, okay, so we have got a user now. We need to make sure that we can assign things. So we remember the user is now authenticated. We just need to assign a token to our user. So we can just quite easily do token, and very similar to what we did here. Actually, we could probably just copy this, to be honest. We'll just copy this and paste that in. Just remove all that. Not user this time, it's a new user. Like so. And basically what we want to do is we want to return a nice response back to our front end. So return response. And remember, this is going to be a JSON response we want to send back. And we need to make sure that we've got type of array inside here. Okay. And if you want to add some data in, so let's just say, I don't know, access, I don't know, token, for example, will be something. We could have, I don't know, token type. So maybe your front-end people might need to know what token type it is. I don't know. This is just all example sake stuff. Let's just throw in maybe an expiry date. So I can show you that these do have expiry dates on them. So you have to refresh tokens. Again, these are for later tutorials. But obviously the most important one we always want to send back is the user. So user and token are pretty much the most popular ones that we always want to send back. So the access token is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be this token. But if we go off the, actually we don't need to because we've set access token here. So you've got token, which is now your access token. We pass that in. Token type is going to be obviously a bearer token. Bearer token. Just informing anyone that this is now a bearer token we're passing in. And now we can also get the token, and we can get some information about the token. Okay, and what we want from the token is the expires at. Basically, that's just a little point that we got that we can get the expiry date about that token. And then obviously the last thing we need to get out of that is the user, like so. And it's not user, it's actually a new user. And we put a semicolon at the end of that. So this is if we have a correct response. So let's try and log in again with our password 1 and let's send. You can see we're trying to get property of token of a non-object. For now, let's see if we can still run that. Okay, I need to find out why that wasn't working. Normally, if you could run this, you could get the expires at heart, but we'll just, again, I'll just move that onto another session because I don't want to spend too much time on the video. So we have this access token, we have the bearer token, and we have our user. We run that again. We can see that we have all the information we need for the user, especially this. This is the most important part here, which is the access token. I want to actually debug what's going on here because normally that should just work naturally if I run TokenToken. Maybe it's because, oh, I know why that's happening. It's because I'm running this access token here. So if I had to take this access token out, actually I want to keep that, and I'm actually going to put it at the end of this one. Oops, making so many mistakes today, I'm sorry. And now if I do TokenToken, we should get some data back from token. Oh, sorry, I need to take access token out from there and run that. So now you see we get some data from TokenToken. So you can see this is coming from our Auth. And you can see here's an expires at, you see, down here. So we can just grab that expires at off the end of this. Sorry, that was my bad. I forgot that I had access token off the end of here. It's terrible. I should never have done that. So we can now put that expires at back in there and we'll take the DD out. So basically I just removed the access token out from this because I did it here just to show you as an example and I got a bit lazy. So you take this piece out. So you're just getting the token or creating it. And then we're just grabbing information off that specific token. So now if I run this now, it should look a lot more nicer. There we go. So we've got our token, our type of token, which is a bearer token, the expiry date of the token. So this will expire at 2021, 6th of the 11th. So it's a whole year, this token. And I'm going to show you how to change that as well. So we can kind of restrict how long we want tokens to last for. By default, it's a year with the OAuth, with passports. So we can change that. And then obviously we've got information about our end user here. So that was a nice easy session. Actually, let's fix this up a bit. So let's go back into this login user. And remember we said we had this. If we just change this to false, so we're just saying this is incorrect. Just so we have a little bit of a handle of this. So if we just go back into login user, and we want to make sure if we now have a user, because obviously if it returns false, we won't have a user. We can place all this data into new user. And if we don't, we can return something else back. So if we just copy this and paste that back in there, we can return something back, like for example, I don't know, message. And then we can just pass a message to the end user just saying, I don't know, most common thing is, oops, drive me nuts how these quotes keep working. Unauthorized. Okay. And basically what you then do is at the end of this, because generically this JSON response will always return a 200, you can put a comma just before here and put in a 401. We are going to separate this. So we're actually going to make response helpers. So error response helpers and also successful message responses. So these will become a lot more smaller. Remember I said controllers I don't like really big. So these will become independent stuff and we can just pass data to them. Let's see what happens if we do this now. So if we change the password to password 2, send, notice we get this message of unauthorized and our status is now unauthorized. If we log in, we now have a user logged in. So that's pretty much the episode for today, getting our user logged in. What we're going to look at in the next session, oh my goodness, is we're going to go to api.php And we're actually going to start putting these into its own categories, giving them like a route name that's specific to them. Because at the moment, we're just using API login. It would be nice if we had something like auth/login, which is quite handy. And plus, we're going to build some middleware around it. So we can check, okay, when we get the user profile, which will be in the next few episodes, we need to make sure that they get the bearer token. So this access token gets passed all the time, and we can check to see if that actually exists. And if it does, we can then get that user. So again, I hope you really enjoyed this session. It was a bit jumpy, sorry. It was just mistakes that came along. But hopefully you did really enjoy it. If you liked it, make sure you hit the like button. If you really enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button. And I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.